Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of In Pit Lane here on Channel 31 Melbourne, Channel 44 Adelaide and of course the In Pit Lane YouTube channel. Remember, if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, it doesn't cost any money. Just go to YouTube, click on the subscribe button, click on the notification bell, and then whenever we produce something new, and we will be producing something new, fingers crossed, in the next few weeks, then make sure that you will get news about that. But we are wrapping up here on Channel 31 and Channel 44 for a while, taking a break. Obviously, under the current circumstances, we can't get back into the studio. We can't do the proper show that we'd really love to do, and so yeah, we're going to pull the plug on it for a few weeks at least, probably until the early part of the new year when hopefully things will settle down. This week on the program, though, we're going to talk Formula One. I mean, nothing's happening locally, but certainly in Formula One, it's a very packed dance card right now. And to lead us through the machinations of what's been going on and off track will be Formula One reporter. He writes for Racer.com, and also you'll know him from the podcast Box of Neutrals. And long-time viewers of the show will know him from his time here with us on In Pit Lane. Michael Lamonato is going to join us to talk Formula One. But there has been some news happening, a little bit locally, but mostly around the world. Let's find out what it is with the In Pit Lane Motorsport News. After some entertaining Formula One races since the return to competition, last weekend's Spanish Grand Prix failed to provide any great highlights as Lewis Hamilton totally dominated the race. Hamilton started from pole, led into turn one, and from then on was never under any real threat, going on to record the 88th win of his remarkable career. Red Bull's Max Verstappen once again finished second to Hamilton, as Valtteri Bottas disappointed with a third place, again failing to chase down the Red Bull driver despite clearly having a faster car. Lance Stroll and Sergio Perez were once again competitive in the Racing Point pink Mercedes. Perez led home Stroll across the line, but a 5-second penalty for ignoring blue flags saw the two swap places. The sad public divorce of Ferrari and Sebastian Vettel continued, with the German driver finishing in 7th place after teammate Charles Leclerc suffered electrical problems that put him out of the race. The woes for Renault and Ricciardo continued. Despite a reasonably competitive qualifying time, Ricciardo dropped back through the pack and finished just outside the points, but he was still 2 places ahead of teammate Esteban Ocon, who has so far been something of a disappointment in his Formula One return. Road race specialist Chase Elliott has won the first NASCAR race on the famous Daytona Speedway road course. Elliott, who won the first stage, came through to lead home second stage winner Denny Hamlin and Martin Truex Jr. The race was free of major incidents, with veteran drivers, led by Hamlin, calling on fellow competitors to show some common sense, especially off the start and into turn one. Australian driver James Davison flew in direct from qualifying at Indianapolis, but spent most of the race around the tail end of the field. He ended up in 30th place. One of the most famous names in the history of the Indianapolis 500 will start from pole for this weekend's delayed running of the Great American Race, with Marco Andretti on pole. It's been 33 years since Marco's grandfather Mario led the field away back in 1987.
I thought of him because today I walked out of the motorhome, it was pretty windy, and he said, he has a famous quote within us. He doesn't say it to many people, but he says, the wind will scare you, but it'll never crash you. So today, he was right. I don't know if that's right, totally, but it's pretty awesome.
Andretti edged our current IndyCar Series leader and 2008 winner Scott Dixon. 2017 winner Takuma Sato will start on the outside of the front row. Honda's dominated qualifying with only one Chevy engined car, the Ed Carpenter-run car for Renus VK, in the top 10. Australia's Will Power will start from back in the pack in position 22, 5 spots clear of fellow Aussie James Davison. A wet Spa circuit greeted the field for the latest round of the World Endurance Championship. Although it was the Rebellion that started from pole, the wet conditions played right into the hands of the all-wheel drive hybrid Toyotas. The number 7 TS050 of Mike Conway, Kamui Kobayashi and Jose Maria Lopez overcame the maximum success ballast to extend their World Championship lead to 12 points with 2 races remaining. They led home teammates Sebastian Buemi, Kazuki Nakajima and Brendan Hartley. Porsche won in GTE Pro with the car of Kevin Estre and Michael Christensen taking the win. In GTE AM, AF Corsa's points-leading trio of Nicholas Nielsen, Francois Perotto and Emmanuel Collard crossed the line just under 3 seconds ahead of Aussie driver Matt Campbell in the Dempsey Proton Racing Porsche. And United Autosport continued their recent domination of LMP2 with Phil Hansen and Felipe Albuquerque, who won the European Le Mans Series race the previous weekend, joining Paul di Resta to take class victory and 4th overall. The next stop, the 24 Hours of Le Mans. The DTM headed to its native Germany with 2 races at the Lausitz-Ring. Once again, it was the Audi of Nico Müller who won the first race of the weekend, although this time around the BMWs were more competitive, with a second place to Sheldon van der Linde. Sunday's race was a thriller as Rene Rast led Müller to the line by only 0.89 seconds to equal the closest ever finish in DTM history. The battle for third place was equally hard fought. Double champion BMW's Marco Wittmann demoted Audi driver Robert Freins to 4th place. And while we can't show you any actual racing footage from last weekend's supercar races up at Darwin, we can delight you with these shots of Scott McLaughlin and Fabian Coulthard playing cricket. Although in Fab's case, perhaps it's not a sporting highlight.
Growing up as a kid, I was always racing go-karts, and it was a little bit unfair to commit myself to a cricket team when I was going to be away racing all the time, so I put my focus into racing.
The pair are on hand to launch a new naming rights sponsor for the local Darwin cricket ground, so really it's more about promoting cricket than it is actual motorsport. But that's okay, I like cricket, although I'm probably not much better at it than Fabian Coulthard. And that's the In Pit Lane news for the week commencing Monday, August the 17th, 2020, and the final news for this year. Ladies and gentlemen, you're now on your own. You're watching In Pit Lane here on the Australian Community Television Alliance, Channel 31 Melbourne, Channel 44 Adelaide, and of course the In Pit Lane YouTube channel. When we come back, we're talking Formula One with Formula One correspondent Michael Lamonato. Don't go away, we'll be right back. Welcome back to In Pit Lane. Well, joining us this week, we're going to talk all things Formula One with Mike Lamonato. Mike Lamonato, as you may well know, is the one of the hosts of the Box of Neutrals podcast. He was a fill-in host here on In Pit Lane on a number of occasions. You can read him in things like Racer Magazine and Racer.com, all over the world. He's everywhere. He's like Chicken Man. He's everywhere. And with all of the stuff happening at the moment, let's face it, there's not a lot happening locally, but there is Formula One. And to find out, get his opinions about what's been happening so far, let's talk to Mike Lamonato. Okay, well, let's talk about the year so far. Should we just sort of pull the plug now and just hand the title to Lewis and say that's it, it's all over, let's not waste any more time?
6 races weirdly feels like a strangely long time to finally come to the conclusion that Lewis Hamilton is going to win this championship, because I mean, of course he starts every season favourite. He's a 6-time champion now. He's going to equal number 7. He's very close to the win record. But that win in Spain was really, I think, quintessentially Lewis, in that he had a car that was equal, of course, to Valtteri Bottas's car, for example. And by the end of the race, the gap was massive. More than 40 seconds. Yes, Bottas took an extra stop, but he was not like he was close before that stop. And we saw it wasn't simply that the car was so much faster. We know that the car was faster than Max Verstappen's Red Bull Racing, but what he was able to extract from it, the absolute maximum from the tyres, he was lapping back markers and going quicker as he got past them than he was on a clear lap. And by the end of the race, he didn't even realise it was on the last lap, so focused was he. And I know he was talking after that race about having an unusual experience, being in a zone he feels like he very rarely gets into. And I think we're talking about Lewis Hamilton operating at his highest level with a car that seems to have pretty much no weaknesses. It's hard to go past him.
Yeah, I think that one of the things, I don't know whether he was in a zone or whether he was just bored like everybody else in watching his just total dominance, because you can imagine that he would like someone to play. He's a very competitive driver. I imagine he wouldn't mind too much. I'm sure that, obviously he wants to win at all costs, but the point is, I think that at some stage he would like to be a bit more challenged than he has been.
Yeah, I think that's true. And he said that, and you could even see that in the years when Ferrari challenged him, or maybe a half year that Ferrari challenged him a couple of seasons ago. He did really relish that. He loved that opportunity to build the team around him and go out and challenge someone external to the team, as opposed to fighting with Nico Rosberg, as had been the situation up to that point. And you can see now that he is relying on saying that Valtteri is pushing him to try and motivate him. And as much as Bottas obviously hasn't quite been on his race pace this season with only one win to date, Bottas definitely has upped his game in qualifying. I mean, we saw it was less than a tenth between them in Spain, and that is something he has worked on, and that is something that if he's going to crack Lewis open this season, it's going to be through getting pole position and then really cleanly getting off the line and trying to dominate in that sense. So there is that, I don't want to call that a weakness, but there is that opportunity for Bottas to challenge, and then there's that opportunity for Hamilton to feed off that. But I think he would certainly like to see a bit more competition in the race. I'm just not sure anyone's going to give it to him.
Where does he sit? I mean, there's a sort of argument, I mean, directly comparing people of different eras, champions of different eras. But, statistically, he's got to be up there in terms of the best Formula One drivers of all time. But do you think it's because of that lack of a consistent rival? I mean, there's no Prost to his Senna, there's no sort of Mansell to Schumacher, there's no Moss to Fangio sort of thing. Do you think that that's why we sort of push him down a little bit? How do you think he will be remembered? I mean, when his time comes, because statistically he's as good as anybody.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Statistically, I mean, this year he will be at minimum equal to Schumacher. He'll break his win record this season almost certainly. He's broken his podium record as of this weekend. And if he does equal the championship record this season, there's very little reason to think he won't break it next season. The regs are the same. His teammates going to be the same. Mercedes is going to do a good job. So you'd almost call that a done deal, without wanting to jinx it. But I guess there is always a degree when we see these massive records, and Schumacher was kind of the same, that, well, of course he had the best car. I would say he's probably one up on Schumacher in that sense because he has had teammates that have been allowed to challenge him. Schumacher had Barrichello, and Barrichello was quick, but was obviously the number 2 by contract driver. Nico Rosberg got a title off Lewis Hamilton, so he has had to fight for them on occasion. And 2018 against Ferrari, that first half of the season in particular, he was up against it and he had to deliver. And I think what has been really pleasing to see, if we were to sort of try and evaluate how good Lewis has been versus that car, I feel like we've really been able to see good growth since 2016 in particular. I think being beaten by Nico Rosberg really hurt him. And every season since, you've seen him get better. And his game is at a level, I think, now that has never been higher. So I feel like it is difficult, as you say, to try and make those comparisons. Probably you wait until the end of the career to try and really fulsomely look back on it. But I think we are witnessing now probably the greatest driver in Formula One history, or if not, certainly at the top of that conversation.
The other driver that needs to be considered in terms of, he's pretty much still even at the start of his career, he's so young, we keep forgetting this, but he's the guy who finished second last weekend, and that's Max Verstappen. I mean, he's not in the best car, it's clearly not the best car, great handling car, but the engine, the Honda engine, still isn't putting out the sort of power and speed that the Mercedes is, and yet he's always there. He's taken a win off of Lewis and Mercedes this season. Where does he fit in, and how do you rate him at the moment?
I think Max is another driver who's just been getting better and better over the last few seasons. I think a lot of that is purely just maturity. Like you said, he's a very young guy, still in his early 20s. He's got experience now, and that's helped him quite a bit. I think it was that last season with Daniel Ricciardo in particular that helped him improve, because Daniel was getting results from that car that he wasn't, and he's really stepped up since then. And I think he will logically, probably with Charles Leclerc over the next, let's say, generation, however long that's going to be competing in that space, because while the Red Bull racing car is clearly very quick inherently, it's very difficult to drive. You wouldn't guess it based on the way Verstappen's pulling performances out of it, but you only need to look at Alex Albon this season. Even now, in retrospect, I think Pierre Gasly last season really alluded to the fact that that car is not a straightforward setup, and also, as you say, not at the top of the horsepower stakes. The fact he's getting those results shows that he's just really an all-out racer. He's not too sensitive about setup. He can drive around problems. He's giving good feedback. He's even at that stage where he's starting to make sort of strategy calls from the car. He's really getting a good picture for a race from the cockpit. And I think that's the best sign, really. It's what Lewis is capable of doing. Schumacher, of course, famously capable of that. And we're seeing those signs in Max.
At the other end of the spectrum, a champion sort of winding down his career right now. I don't know, I'm finding the whole public divorce between Sebastian Vettel and Ferrari to be somewhat sad at the moment. I mean, they're like an old couple of a constantly battling old couple. They're bickering at each other all the time. Do you think, under the circumstances, that at some stage one or both of them should, basically write up this season and say, look, let's call it quits early and walk away from this, because we've fallen out of love?
It wouldn't surprise me, you know. I know it's a difficult thing to imagine because there'll be a contract breakage involved and then there'll need to be other drivers involved. So maybe it's not extremely likely, but I feel like it will be crossing their mind at some point because, yeah, like you say, extremely public. It's getting very messy. And I really get the sense that this is years of frustration for Sebastian Vettel now erupting. You know, he's been able to push that down somewhere deep in his psyche because he's driving for Ferrari. And of course, the last couple of years, the car has been kind of all right. There was one year he almost could have taken the title. And I think he also recognized that he played a part in not achieving that. But now that Ferrari's regressed to what I feel like we have to say is kind of the Ferrari means, kind of their average place where the car's not the best and the calls are very much not the best and the team's a bit of a mess. He's now releasing all of that energy. And we heard that on the radio, of course, in the Spanish Grand Prix, where he was essentially doing the strategist's job twice. First asking what the strategy was and then correcting it later on and delivering seventh, which sounds terrible to say, was quite a good result for that car and for him this season. And you do wonder how this is going to end because it's already getting a bit messy. Publicly, they're trying to keep it calm. But if you look at their native language media, it's less neat than the English language media. So how it ends is going to be interesting. And like you say, I think it is a bit sad because he's a four-time champion at the end of the day. He deserves some level of respect, and it feels like that's not there at the moment.
Yes, well, obviously there's a lot to come for the rest of this season and also for the season next year and into the future. We're going to take a break now on In Pit Lane, but when we come back, we're going to be talking more Formula One with our special guest, Mike Lamonato. Don't go away, you're watching In Pit Lane, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to In Pit Lane. Our guest tonight is Michael Lamonato, Formula One reporter, the man from Box of Neutrals podcast and from all over the world of Formula One reporting. And Michael, we were talking before the break about the Sebastian Vettel situation. Somebody else who's moving on next year is our own Dan Ricciardo. And do you think under the circumstances that Dan would be looking at that move now and thinking, yeah, I could have gone to Ferrari, but yeah.
Yeah, you got to wonder what Carlos Sainz is thinking as well. He thought he had the move of a lifetime stitched up. I mean, he's going to be a Ferrari driver, but it's a long rebuild that team's got in front of them. And I mean, yeah, from Daniel Ricciardo's perspective, it's still, of course, a gamble. He knew it was going to be a gamble to move from Renault to McLaren as much as it was to move to Renault in the first place. On the evidence of the Spanish Grand Prix, which I think is an important race in terms of assessing where the cars are, it's a real all-round test of the car is that circuit. And you could see Renault again regressed back out of the top 10, didn't score any points, a shame, because they had their new CEO there, the group CEO, and didn't have anything to show for that race. And McLaren was back up in the points, not extremely powerful. You feel like maybe their early results this season were a bit of a blip, but still ahead in that battle. Not good for Renault considering that McLaren is a customer team. And that kind of speaks to, I think, some of the issues Ricciardo's alluded to with Renault, and that they brought a lot of developments this season in the first couple of races, a lot of big developments. And yet when you get to a track that they all know well and where setup should be pretty straightforward, still no points on offer, whereas McLaren has taken that bit of a step forward. They're still very much in the midfield, of course, so it's anyone's guess whether they can move forward from that, not next season, but of course when the regulations change the year after that. But you know, on the evidence of admittedly only 6 races so far, you can start to see why Daniel's believing McLaren is a better long-term prospect. Not that the Renault should be discounted from competing at the front later in the next cycle of rules, but at the moment you must be feeling relatively pleased that McLaren's where he's going to end up.
As you mentioned, the boss of Renault being there on the weekend, I mean, it would worry me also in the current environment that you've got the new big boss of Renault having a look and sitting through all of that, going back to his hotel room and putting his head in his hands and going, do we really need this?
Yeah, look, this is, I suspect, would have played into the thinking as well, because back when the decision was made in the first half of the year, you know, I hesitate to say the height of the pandemic because who knows where it's going, but it was certainly the most uncertain time, I suppose. The Renault-Nissan group was laying off a lot of people. There were massive losses, and you had to say, well, manufacturers love pulling out of Formula One when there are economic problems, of course, because in the end of the day, it's just exorbitant marketing, really. But it's increasingly seeming like Renault will stick around thanks to the budget cap. They're due to sign the commercial agreements that will take them forward in the next cycle of rules, probably within this month. There's no sign that they won't be signing that. So Renault seems like they'll commit. Really, if anyone should be worried, it's probably Cyril Abiteboul. If there's no performance from that team, you'd have to think he's got to come under pressure at some point. Let's not forget the original idea of getting into Formula One was that they'd be winning titles at this point, or competing for them at least, and they're certainly a long way off that.
We talked about Max Verstappen, you mentioned Charles Leclerc. If you have a look at it, I mean, it really is an exciting time ahead with young drivers. Those two guys, and then you add people like George Russell and Lando Norris and those sort of people. In the future, if all goes according to plans and they get these new regulations right, not next year now, but the year after, it could be a really golden time for Formula One.
Yeah, if all goes to plan. I feel like we say that every 4 or 5 years in Formula One, and we're still here. Lewis is still winning. Yeah, but you are absolutely right. The young generation, and we probably have to include Max in that because he's not that much older than them, despite having been around for what feels like ages, is really quick. They're really talented. We've had a couple of really strong generations in the junior formula, and I feel like we've got one in F3 now as well, and not too far off is F2. So even the next couple of years, we should see a really great crop of drivers. And I know we have been saying this recently, but there are very few drivers on the Formula One grid, if any, you would say don't at least deserve a crack there. There are no drivers that are obviously just there because of money. Yes, some people point to Lance Stroll, but even he had a good race on the weekend. He's a quick guy. It's a really strong grid, which, you know, Lewis Hamilton has no signs of retiring yet, but you'd think his next contract is probably his last. Once he moves on, Kimi's obviously moving on. He already has mentally, I suspect, but physically soon as well. Vettel,
how can we tell?
You know, yeah, he's in a contract cycle as well. So once they move on, we're in really good hands. And assuming, you know, George Russell's in line for a Mercedes drive, presumably, Lando Norris, hopefully with a rejuvenated McLaren. Even Alex Albon I want to include here. I know he's showing quite poorly at Red Bull Racing at the moment, but he is quick. He was in that Norris and Russell category. He took the championship to the wire for F2 that season. So there are a lot of guys that if the seats are competitive and equal, we should be in for a great time.
The other thing about Albon that's impressed me is the fact that, you know, he's not the best qualifier and not the best starter, but unlike what we're seeing with Valtteri, he is coming on, you know, during the race. He's passing a lot of people and he's coming on strong towards the end of the race. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what, if there's going to be a difference between his story and Gasly's, it's that aggression in the race. Because while Red Bull Racing knew even last year their car was a bit difficult to set up and qualify in, they were disappointed that he didn't show enough aggression in the race. And look, a part of that, of course, was the car as well. But he really had a tendency to put his head down. And okay, there was a bit of internal politics there as well, I think. But that was not impressive for them. Whereas Albon, as you said, every race so far, even the race that he could have won, the first Grand Prix in Austria, they weren't disappointed, or they weren't too disappointed, I should say, because he lost it by being aggressive, by going for it when the tyres were still at their best for him, when Hamilton was a bit on the ropes. And it didn't work out, but that's what they want to see. So if he can get through this period, this difficult time he's going through, then I think he should be a competitive guy.
Well, it's certainly an interesting time ahead. I mean, everything changes from week to week, as we keep saying every week on the program. Whatever we talk about today, by the time the show goes to air on Friday night, everything could have changed completely. I mean, but the one thing we know is the one thing we can predict about Formula One is its unpredictability. Michael, if people want to catch up with you, your various outputs, your writings, your podcasts, where do they go?
You can find me on Twitter, Michael Lamonato, good luck spelling it, or Box of Neutrals is the podcast. We've been doing it, for quite a while. I think this might be our 10th year, actually. So boxofneutrals.com or subscribe wherever you ordinarily get your podcasts.
Okay, well, it's great to catch up again, and it's been a while, and good luck with the rest of the year. Hopefully you'll have the opportunity to get back out into the wonderful wide world of Formula One later and start catching up with people. But for now, you're like the rest of us. We're stuck in COVID City, Melbourne, and we're watching on television, and we're trying to escape via Formula One. So for now, Mike Lamonato, thanks for joining us in Pit Lane.
A pleasure, Brett.
Thanks to Michael Lamonato for joining us here on the program to talk all things Formula One. Now, that's the final episode of In Pit Lane for this season. Look, it's obviously been a very difficult situation over the past few months. You know, sitting here in the spare room at home doing the program, it's not as much fun as being in the proper television studio with all of our crew and with a band and all the things that make it so much fun to do In Pit Lane every week. So we're going to take a break for a little while. We're not going away forever, though. Remember, follow us on Facebook for our live Zoomcast every Thursday night, 9 o'clock, full course yellow. Check us out on Facebook and you'll be able to find out how you can take part in that. Also, please like and subscribe to the In Pit Lane YouTube channel, because as soon as something does happen in Melbourne and we can get out and film, that's where you're going to see it for the foreseeable future. But hopefully, fingers crossed, we get over this and we can get back into the RMIT studios sometime early in the new year for a brand new season, a proper season of In Pit Lane. So from all of us here on the program, thank you to everyone who has supported the show over the past very difficult year. But for now, thanks for joining us and bye for now.